1. The job. I was starting my side business doing IT work for businesses, and had some successful jobs for a few companies. I found word of mouth was the best way to gain new clients because entrepreneurs tend to network with other business owners. Tony was one such client who had heard I had done some work for a client and called to see if I could help. His company's needs were to stop using a semi-accounting service that they had been paying a percentage of their profit to, process payments, purchase orders, and billings receivables. He brought in an accountant to work, a new product, pretty well known. They wanted a server to be accessible remotely and had already paid their ISP for a static IP for the server, but needed the actual server, redundancy UPS, and firewall device. I explained that for the product they would probably set up a workstation and not a server, and it would run approximately $3,500 total. And would be easy, but no, the owner wanted a full-blown server system with all the bells and whistles. He explained that he would likely be using the server for a CRM and a few other systems later on. The setup. Overall, the entire cost of the system would be $8,000, not including a few other services that needed annual billing. VPN and remote service. Equipment costs was $7,500, my labor charge was $500, UPS was $1,500, server was $3,800. And refurbed firewall, Cisco ASA, with programming by a third-party specialist was $1,800, and a spare rack was $400. I got my contract signed, put an order with my distributor. I have Net45 set up with them. And the firewall specialist got to work 1.5 weeks later when the firewall came in last. I finished the job on a single weekend and got everything up and going after a call to the ISP, whom did not like the firewall appliance I installed. For some reason, they had to tweak things on their end and finally allowed the traffic to go through once more. I confirmed function with the owner, who verbally approved and was happy. The AH move. I sent my invoice promptly on Monday. Left it as in they had 1 week to pay. When I saw no reply or payment after 4 days, I messaged Tony and asked if they had received my invoice. To my surprise, he replied that the server was not working, and proceeded to call me and tell me that the whole thing was a total waste of money, and I should have never done the job. I of course apologized and informed him I would be on the way to fix whatever the problem was. When I got there, they refused to let me in to see the server, claiming they had someone coming over to fix my mishaps. At that point I informed them they still needed to pay for the equipment, and we could maybe discuss my labor after I figure out what's going on. Tony refused to let me in, and was pretty upset. The advice. At this time, I was pretty upset. 2.5 weeks had passed since I ordered my equipment, and my distributor was needing to get paid within 45 days. I was getting very nervous and was thinking of taking it to small claims court, until talking with a friend. He informed me I could pull a mechanics lien. I informed him this was for IT, and he stated that mechanics lien, where I live, can actually be pulled on various industries, and IT was one of them. So I started the process to fill out and file a mechanics lien on Tony's company. Much to my surprise, there was no court date. All I needed to do was provide considerable proof to clerks and later on the constable. The revenge. After filling out the mechanics lien and serving him notice, I once again gave him the opportunity to pay the $8,000 owed. By this time I had spoken with my distributor, and he switched my account from Net45 to Net90. He refused via phone call and got him on text. I took the information I had and went to the local constables, whom, after seeing the mechanics lien and proof, set up an appointment to meet me at the place of business to take back my server, UPS, and firewall. I went in on Tuesday, which I had learned was the day the accountant came in to start the week 0. Constable and I arrived at 7:30 a.m., right on opening time. At first they refused entry, until Tony came by and was informed I was enforcing my mechanics lien and would be taking back my equipment. He immediately got riled up and claimed I could not take the equipment because a new person had replaced it all. The constable asked if I had serial numbers and models for the equipment, which I did. We go in and find my server, UPS, and firewall all in the exact same way I left it. The server showed it had been online for the entire time. No real changes were noticed, and as far as I could tell, no one had worked on it. Tony began to chuckle when I shut the server down and says, "How are you going to take the system when it's bolted to the ground? Bet you didn't think about that, did you? You idiot." He did not realize that rack-mounted equipment is not permanently attached to the mount. I guess he thought he had me beat because it was all one system that you cannot take apart and not something that was put together. His jaw dropped the moment I removed the server, loaded it onto the cart after removing a couple of bolts. He started panicking and started telling the constable that he would sue him if he didn't stop me. The constable simply stayed calm and ignored the owner. I guess after a bit he informed Tony that he needed to get out of his face and step back. But when Tony refused to back down, the constable undid his holster safety harness and put his hand on his firearm. Tony's face was exquisite, full of fear and eventually a dawning sensation that this was going to happen one way or another. At first I did not understand why he was so riled up, and now had a panicked face like his world just collapsed until a bit later. I wrapped up my server, UPS, firewall, and left the rack. True to Tony's word, undoing the bolts proved difficult to impossible with the tools I had, so I told Tony he could keep it for the new server he tries to set up. It didn't take more than 2 hours before I got a call from him stating that he had talked to his attorney and he would be suing me for damages and I would be going to jail for trespassing. I informed him he did not pay for the equipment, his equipment was repoed, thus there was nothing to sue for. As far as trespassing, I was servicing a mechanics lien with a law enforcement officer, thus it is not trespassing. He then starts hemming and hawing about how he needs to bill clients because he hasn't had revenue in a week, but his accountant can't do anything because she has no access to the accounting software and they have no copies. I informed him it was not my problem. I would not be giving access to the server nor data contained, and he should have paid for the equipment instead of trying to screw me over for $8,000. He then offered to pay me if I could install the server back the same day, but that only if I did it that same day, otherwise he'd find someone else. I informed him that our original contract was null and void. I would be returning the equipment to my distributor, but first I had to wipe the storage by DoD standards, which means 0% chance of recovering files unless he somehow had NSA-level funds. He starts freaking out and resorts back to what he usually did, threatening me with a lawsuit to make my life a living hell, etc. So I hang up and text him I am going to proceed to delete his data that evening, and that I was no longer interested in working with him. More advice and the real revenge. He called me at least 50 times. I just silenced my phone and had to talk to my friend later that night. The friend who had given me the advice, he then tells me why I was returning the equipment. If I had the only copy that has everything from client names, contacts, phone numbers, billings, receivables, etc. He asked me how much revenue did the company generate. I informed him I was taking a wild guess, but it was somewhere in the ballpark of $58,678.21 for the last month. He laughs and tells me, why don't you charge them double the price to get his equipment back, and have him pay you cash before you start? He was right. I was taking my PettyRevenge and walking out with $1,800 in a firewall I had to pay in advance, and a $500 unpaid labor charge. Why not take it a step further to get sweet revenge and get paid a fat stack of money? The following day I messaged Tony. I apologized for the way I behaved yesterday. It was not professional. Unfortunately, your shit attitude and attempts to screw me over got the better of me. The server has not been wiped yet. I would like to reconsider a new arrangement so we can salvage this sour experience and turn it into sweet honey. Are you interested in working with me to get your equipment back? I must warn you, it will be extra since I would be doing double the work. Let me know. Tony immediately called me, and immediately his asshole ways came up.
I know you would change your mind and come crawling back. Yes, I want everything back, but I'm only paying $8,050 and not a dime more. The $50 is me being generous to give you a second chance to do things right.
I immediately informed him that I still have all the equipment, and in fact it would only take maybe 20 minutes to complete the job. However, I had a different idea in terms of price. The new price was $15,000 to be paid in cash. He immediately starts yelling and hollering. I keep talking and inform him he has 2 weeks to decide if being able to get paid by his clients was worth it. If not, the equipment was going back, and that would be that. No hard feelings. I hang up. About 2 days later, I get a call from Tony informing me he agreed to the new arrangement to please set it up and install it ASAP. I tell him I can go Friday, but I would need to be paid $15,000 in cash before I even unload a single bolt from my vehicle. He agreed. I could hear a lady talking, telling him he needs to get this resolved because they had not had revenue in nearly 2 weeks. This was on Wednesday. On Thursday, I get a call from his daughter, whom is apparently the accountant and the lady whom was telling him to resolve it. She is cutting a check and needs to know my name. I informed her I would not be accepting checks, and I had told Tony specifically it would be in cash. She says okay and tells me the amount was $12,000, correct? I once again correct her and inform her the correct amount was $15,000 cash. She said in satire, "Of course it's $15,000. I'll go make the withdrawal and have the money ready tomorrow." Sure enough, Friday morning, true to her word, she and Tony were there with $15,000 cash. I counted it in front of her and Tony. She makes a comment saying that I was a lifesaver because they could not go back to the service they used before to get paid, and they urgently needed to get some POs sent out. I placed it in my vehicle, locked the glove box, and unloaded the equipment. True to my word, it took me 20 minutes to place the server, firewall, and UPS inside the rack mount, connect the cables, power on the server, and ask them to test it out when they get a chance. If anything was wrong, to not contact me and have a good day. I actually had tested it out before I left their server room. Despite my pettiness at times, I am still a professional. 2. Some background. This takes place in a preschool with 3-year-olds. At this school, many of the teachers have children attend there, obviously because they get a big discount, which isn't the problem. Most of the teachers don't mind their child's teacher reprimanding or redirecting their behavior, as they are teachers themselves. But then there's entitled admin. She is the annoying admin, who would call in the middle of our lessons to remind us to take pictures of the kids or stupid stuff like that, which we do every single day. She loves to micromanage everyone. I've had several issues with her in the past over these phone calls, as have other teachers. Entitled admin had a son in my class, tiny monster. He was not really a bad kid overall, but when he would act out, yikes. But my coworker and I, we work in teams, could easily handle him. However, entitled admin would constantly tell us to call her when he acts up. Now, the thing is, we don't call parents for misbehavior, so why would we call her? None of the other teachers or parents do that. She finally blew up at my coworker and I about it, saying how he never gets prizes and if we just called her, he would behave better. When she left, I looked at my coworker, who looked super annoyed, and a plan came to mind. Cue malicious compliance. Every time Tiny Monster would misbehave, I would call the front office. Got up during lessons, called. Talked back, called. Screamed at us, called. Told a friend he was stupid, called. Keep going to pee too much, called. Didn't cover his mouth when sneezing, called. Anything silly, out of the ordinary, we called up front to let entitled admin know what was going on. Let me tell you, these phone calls really added up. She would physically come to the room after each call the first day, but pretty soon she started getting annoyed and would just say, "Thanks for telling me," by day 2. The fallout. After 3 days of calling for little things, another admin came to talk to us about why we were calling so much for one student. We explained entitled admin's request, and she laughed at how ridiculous it was to have us do it in the first place. She talked to entitled admin, and explained it was unreasonable to have us call when we don't call other parents. The request to call her stopped, and we continued on with the school year. It was not a huge malicious compliance, but it was a small victory. 3. Back in 2010, I got a job working for a company that has an unofficial food item, where you put $1 menu sandwich into another. I worked there for 1.5 years. During that time, I learned everything. I could open, close, work the grill very well, and front work counter and drive-through as well, if not better, than most that worked there on a consistent basis. I'd been promised a review when I was hired that was to take place after 6 months of being there. Being the kind of employee that wants to move up in the company, I never pushed the issue, but instead kept pushing to learn everything I could so that when I did get my review, I would get a good one. In my time there, I called off once because I was recovering from emergency surgery to get rid of a pilonidal cyst that had ruptured. On the same token, I was always the first to volunteer to pick up a shift if it didn't interfere with my college classes. After being there 1.5 years, they announced everyone would be getting a review. My general manager came to me and told me the time she wanted to schedule me for a raise. I told her at that time that I would be needing a quarter raise, $10 a week, in order to make it so I could sustain working there while going to college, and she said she understood. When my review came, I was floored. Despite all of the work I had put in and energy I had poured into my job hoping to reach management while going to college, she assessed me as a meets expectations employee. I don't mean to sound cocky, but I knew my own value as an employee. I knew I more than exceeded expectations of an employee of that company, and I said as much. She tried to claim it was based on the consensus of other managers, but I knew myself to be a favorite employee of every manager but her. She then told me that she would be giving me a 15-cent raise. I told her I had requested a quarter, and she said that 15 cents was the best she could do. The wheels turned in my head, and I knew I was undervalued by her, and I would never have a chance to move up. So I told her I would be putting in my 2 weeks' notice. She looked at me as if I had slapped her and said, "You're leaving over 10 cents?" I looked her right in the eyes as I said, "No, you're losing a fully cross-trained employee that loves her job over 10 cents. I then stood up and walked out to my car. I did write out a 2 weeks' notice and immediately began looking for work. During my search, when she worked with me, she'd frequently tell me how someone of my experience couldn't hope to get a job making the $8 I'd requested of them. Well, I did, and then some. I applied to a gas station that was obsessed with the letter Z on the East Coast, and was to work in their kitchen overnight. I'd be making $12 an hour if I got the job. I called literally every day until I got an interview. I had my interview the night of my last call, and was given the job on the spot. With 5 days left of my notice, I informed her that I had gotten a job, where I'd gotten it, and how much I'd be making. If looks could kill. I'd have never been able to start at my other job because of the dirt I'd be buried under. To get back at me, she wanted the one thing I treasured most. As an employee working for that company, they'd give you pins you could put on your hat to show your accomplishments. In a year and a half, I had earned over 30 pins. I was proud of them, and considered them a collection. She told me that after my last shift, I'd have to return my uniforms. And all of my pins. I claimed the pins were mine as payment for things I had done, but she told me she would make sure I'd be docked the cost of the pins out of my last paycheck if I didn't return them. She did it. Despite everything I'd worked for to turn this in my favor, she got under my skin. So I decided to get her back. Not wanting to completely burn a bridge, I came up with an idea. An idea I can confidently say was my own, but had been done before in some shows I'd never seen at the time. I decided to suspend them in Jell-O. The night before my last shift, I cooked up a large bowl of Jell-O before putting it in the fridge. I tied strings around my pins and suspended them at various points throughout the bowl by taping the string ends to outside of the bowl. I let it cool overnight. After I finished my last shift, I told my manager I was running home to get my uniforms and pins. I returned half an hour later with my Jell-O overturned onto a plate. "I'll always miss you," plate. Then I put the uniforms on the floor next to her desk, and looking her dead in the eye, placed the Jell-O on her desk and said, "Here's your pins." I walked out without waiting for her response, and decided never to go there again. My roommate, who also worked there, told me that it was all her co-workers could talk about that day. I was at least able to make some satisfaction in the fact that maybe I would inspire some other shenanigans for my co-workers if they, too, decided that company was not for them. As a reminder, people don't quit bad jobs, they quit bad managers. 4. I finished my apprenticeship building buses. I've done a stint testing in quality, and I'm approached to apply for the good inspector role. Never been approached about a job before, which I was quite taken aback by, so yeah, let's go for it. Got the job very easily, using a vernier caliper to measure one part in a quick interview. Start the job and it's going well. Level of components for me to look at is steady and under control, and production getting what they want. Anyone who's been involved in engineering will know that sometimes drawing for parts are tied up to really tight tolerances, which don't matter on a feature, which has little to no impact on the assembly. There are parts which, something like a radius, a curve on an edge normally to stop people cutting themselves. On an edge isn't quite as big as it should be, but it's there, no one's going to cut their hand. My boss sees my report on this part due to an investigation about something else, and sees I've marked it as being a bit smaller. My boss, who has never built any of these buses or really knows where the parts go, gives me a grilling saying that a radius of 3 instead of 4 is outside of limit, and I shouldn't have passed them and quarantined them to be returned to the supplier to correct. I mentioned that this is a small thing that won't affect the assembly and function of the bus, but he ain't having it. In comes malicious compliance, so I can't release anything unless it's 100%. Okay, fine. I start to implement this, and within 3 weeks of this, our quarantine area is full and overloading to the point that it's going into the gangway. I'm getting constant calls about parts from production, materials, engineering, R&D, asking for XYZ parts. which I tell them they have been quarantined for this reason, which they find ridiculous and demand I release them. I say no. I've been given strict orders and I'm following them. Materials department also feed this back to the suppliers, saying their parts have been restricted for X reason, which I'm getting phone calls from suppliers asking about this. They won't speak to my boss because they don't like him, and he has little knowledge of assembly and the manufacture of parts. I explain the same thing as I've done to the departments in my work, and the suppliers are furious and say they've been doing these parts like this for years. I say sorry, I've been given strict orders. A week after that, my boss is called into the head of quality and has a long meeting about the release of product with various design engineers. After that meeting, my boss comes back to me and explains that I shouldn't be so critical on small features that won't necessarily have an effect on the assembly, and that I'm damaging production. I smile and say okay. A couple of weeks later, after our morning meeting on supplier issues, I'm the last one to leave. My head of quality is in the room and tells me he understands I have a good knowledge of how these buses are made, and my opinion on what will be okay or not is valid and valued. For those engineers out there, you were probably thinking why not apply for a concession. While the concession process was so long-winded it required an engineer to review the concession to physically see the parts and how they fit. They then approve the concession, which then goes to the monthly manager meeting with 5 managers, out of however many. I had to sign it off to say it was fine. To also change the drawing, as well as a very long process, which could take months for it to be approved. Bit of a long one, I know. 5 or 6 years down the line, I still think of how ridiculous the whole thing was, because my boss clearly did not have a clue about manufacture or assembly. The only reason I think he got his job was because he would argue with suppliers till he gets what he wants, regardless of if he's right or the information he is giving the suppliers is right. From that guy, I never wanted to be that guy that was clueless, and from each trial that I have done, I have always made sure to really do my homework on the product. And also that if I didn't know something, there is nothing wrong with saying explain it to me, rather than try to bullshit your way out of it. Hope you all enjoyed that. 5. Alright, fellow appreciators of absurdity and pettiness. Here's a satisfying listen to get you that much closer to the weekend as you grind away at the hamster wheel that is the American work week. So I recently transitioned from active duty army to the National Guard, which, as my fellow former service members know, comes with a metric buttload of paperwork and medical records. So I got out last December, got accepted to grad school in February, and just started class a few weeks ago. As you all know, there is some sort of pandemic virusy thing going on, and many institutions require a vaccine to attend in-person classes, which the program I'm enrolled in falls under. Like a good little boy, I got my vaccine as soon as I could last March, posted the obligatory nobody gives a shit picture of my vaccine card, and then moved on with my life. Fast forward to June, and I'm hopping through the endless admin hoops of going back to school, and of course, submitting immunization records is on the to-do list. Since I got my shot through the National Guard, they actually already had the box checked for the COVID vaccine. Cool. Maybe that's because I'm attending a public university in the state I'm in the Guard for, so maybe they share a medical database. I don't know, it doesn't matter. And for those of you who cry, "Epa!" Newsflash, when you join the military you give a few things up, get stuff in return, blah blah. Not what the story's about. Although I don't think that a COVID shot can do anything to me that anthrax, typhoid, and smallpox shots, 3 pinched nerves, and 5 years of running on pure hate and caffeine hasn't done to me already. But hey, I'm still kicking. On to the malicious compliance part. Now, to submit the rest of my immunization shot records, I have to upload a PDF into the school's medical portal. So I go through the shot record in my medical out-processing packet, snip the page so it's just the immunizations, thinking no need to include extraneous military stuff that may confuse them, and hit submit. It's literally just 1 page. A few days later, lo and behold, I get a notice saying my medical records are incomplete or incorrect, and action is required on my behalf. I have to upload more info. Okay, will do. I just want to get this done. So I submit the whole shot record and historical record testing portion, about 30 pages. Oh, what do you know, déjà vu. A few days later, I get an email saying, "Dear Mr. Student, this is to inform you that additional action is required." Yeesh. So I log into the medical portal because, of course, this can't be done through email. HIPAA, I know, I just like to complain because we're all human, sue me. And see that whoever reviewed the longer PDF I uploaded wasn't satisfied, saying my submission of proof of immunization was incomplete. Okay, fine, you know what? We'll play that game. I go dig through a closet and find the folder that has my out-processing stuff from active duty. The thing is, when you get out, they give you a physical hard copy of your medical records on CDs, in addition to all the digital stuff, as well as what they sent to the VA. My medical records were long enough to require 2 CDs, so copy them to my laptop, then upload them to the school's medical portal. All 745 pages of CD1 and 300 pages of CD2. Before I hit upload, I respond to the previous message explaining that this is the entirety of my service medical records. And if this isn't sufficient documentation, please let me know. This was maybe late July, early August. Fast forward to mid-September, and today I received an email confirming the acknowledgement of my proof of vaccination status. Hooray! Solely out of curiosity, I decide to check the documents part. And lo and behold, it's the original one-pager I made. Now, to be fair, I have no idea if someone read through the whole thing or said fuck this guy and went back to the first one, but either way, due to the 6+ week wait, I'd like to think some poor sap actually tried to dig through that. But hey, if you really want to waste my time, I'll return the favor. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 96. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do like, subscribe, and possibly comment too. I'm not going to judge you if you want to comment. It's all good. Right, okay, where are we? What day is this? I have no idea. Technically Monday. Today's video is a bit late for those of you watching on the day it goes up. For those of you watching after it's uploaded, then move along, nothing to see here. Pretty busy day today, not a lot of sleep, had a few things to take care of, but we've got the video done now. And I'm going to go rest now because I still need lots and lots of rest. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.